So social and emotional learning as a lever for social justice and equity will be presented by Amy McConnell Franklin. Based in Taos with her husband and family, Amy McConnell Franklin spent most of the past 4 years in Thailand working with international schools and refugee education, where she became passionate researching emotional capacities contributing to resilience in refugees. Amy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you very much. So I see a few familiar names on the screen. Glad to see you back. And some of this will be repetition of what we talked about in Kathy Summers Price's session on chess, and some will be new, and it's just a new application. So yeah, my name's Amy. I'm in Taos now, rather surprisingly because of the COVID pandemic. I was in Thailand and came back to New Mexico for 3 weeks and have been here ever since. But I have a big household full of adult children and some partners, and it's been lovely. Of course, a gorgeous fall and a wonderful place to be safe and able to be home and watching what's happening. Very involved with a lot of social emotional learning here throughout the state at this point. So I would like us to start with a check-in. And if for those of you who were in the session on chess, we started with a check-in using the metaphor of a landscape to describe how we're doing right now. I'd like to invite you to think of an animal that would describe how you're doing this Friday afternoon, a sort of prolonged fall we've had. You've probably been on Zoom for quite a few hours at this point. So what animal would describe how you're doing right now? And we're actually going to go into breakout rooms in order to answer that question. I'll model that first with any willing partners, if Kathy's available. Or someone else, Katrina, if you are available. Yes, Kathy. Yeah, good. So we'll model that. So this check-in has actually got 3 parts to it. So first part is, how are you doing? Described as using the metaphor of an animal. And what about that animal are you feeling? What makes you feel about like that little animal or that big animal? Number 2, who are you sharing your household with these days? These are unusual times. Who's in under your same roof with you? And thirdly, what do you know about SEL, social and emotional learning? What does that term mean to you? What has been your experience with it? Do you think that is something we should be, as educators, systematically developing in students? Is that somebody else's responsibility? Is it not even really a teachable, learnable? Is it needed? So have that discussion. So we're going to actually give you, I think we're going to try to put you in groups of 2 in pairs. Take about a good 6 minutes, 8 minutes. I think we'll set you for 8 minutes in the breakout room. So just sharing those things in whatever order you'd like. Who are you sharing your household with? What animal would describe how you're doing right now and the reasons for that? And finally, what do you know about SEL? What questions do you have? What concerns perhaps do you have about that? Okay, so Kathy, let's just model just the check-in, if you would. So do you have I know you've already been out riding a horse between our last session and this one. So what animal would describe how you're doing as you go through your busy day?
Well, actually today it is a horse. Either I'm running around and playing, or I'm kind of plodding around, or I'm spooking at something I forgot. So horse is on my mind, and you're right. It is a beautiful fall day out there. I share my household right now with my husband, Robin. Our children are grown and moved away. And of course we have 2 dogs, a cat, and the outside horses. And then SEL, I think, is really the missing piece. In fact, when I was in charge of gifted in Bloomfield schools, I actually asked you, Amy, to come and talk to my staff at the time, because it was fairly, a new area. Started by Goldman's book, but I really feel it has made a huge impact, just learning from you and learning more from other experts in the field. It impacts now, it didn't, not only my education and working with others and teachers, but personally and family and now grandkids. So I think it's extremely important.
Thanks, Kath. I feel like a skunk. And I think it's because I had lunch outside in the sun, and it's quite close to our compost bin. And you know how skunks, they walk around, they look busy and determined, but they don't look scared. I think they know they've got a upper hand for lots of people. And today I feel busy but determined and not scared like a rabbit, you know, jumping, but rather confident but determined. Like now is the time to gather the seeds, get the pods together, get the nest ready. Winter is coming. But I think the skunk part is the confidence that a skunk carries with him or her, with him or her. And yeah, so I think that's the reason I don't feel scared today. I feel quite determined. I share the household right now with 8 people. There are 8 of us total, myself, my husband, and he also came back from Thailand in March. And then we were joined by one eldest son and his wife, second eldest son and his fiance, youngest son from London, only daughter from Singapore just a month ago. And everybody's gone through processes of quarantining, etc. Quite unusual to have adult children home. In our culture, at least, it's quite unusual to have your adult children home and all living under the same roof and sharing meals and sharing projects, and everybody's gratefully able to work online. So yeah, quite remarkable to be home with everybody. So 8 of us. And SEL, I got involved, as Kathy mentioned, actually, that was one of the early times that I started getting really involved in 95 when Goldman's book came out. And then I started pursuing very, very actively the whole field of social emotional learning, and emotional intelligence was really the banner under which I first studied social emotional learning. I got very involved with the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning, which I highly recommend you look up. I can put it in the chat. Castle.org has been doing research for the past 3 decades on the efficacy of curriculum, teacher training. They're really landing heavily on teacher training these days and on creating cultures and environments, climates in schools that promote self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, relationship skills, and good decision-making, empathetic, compassionate decision-making. So if you would now go into, Lori will put us in breakout rooms. You'll have 8 minutes to share those 3 questions. Everybody okay with those questions? I can put up my screen share, my screen if you'd like, but if you've got those, we'll just proceed. Thank you, Lori, for breaking us out into groups. If you have trouble, come back to the main room and we'll sort it out if you don't have someone show up with you.
You're muted.
Are we changing rooms? Because that wasn't.
It was an accident. I didn't get it set. I don't know where the time got set. So I'm gonna have to, I'll have to put everybody back in.
Okay.
I can't find where to set the time. I'm so sorry. I can recreate the same rooms though again.
Oh, okay. That was great though, Lori. I mean, did everybody have, you didn't quite have time? Probably, yeah.
I can do another 2 minutes. Would you like to do that?
Actually, Lori, let's wait. We're going to go, if it's not difficult to recreate the same rooms when we go into the next breakout, if we can do the same people, that would be great.
Okay, I will see if I can make
But I don't know how hard that is. Yeah, thank you. So
Okay.
I have connected, in addition to Kathy and Lori, I've connected with 2 people who are on the call now, one earlier this morning and just now with Amy Miller. And I just am so conscious how grateful I am for one-on-one connections at this time that are structured, that are positive, that are focused on what's going well and on self as well as on others. And I think this is a particular time in history where those needs are just exaggerated and so much more apparent. And how can we as teachers be sure that kids are getting that attention, that one-on-one attention, that connectedness? How do we connect and then instruct, prioritize the connection? And I think I have been remiss in not thinking enough about the one-on-one. You know, that a child, if he or she were normally in school, they might have a moment with a teacher. Oh, you know, as they're going out the door, as they're packing up their backpack, the teacher speaks to them. Hey, how's it going? Oh yeah, you having a game last weekend? How'd it go? You know, that connection. But can we intentionally and systematically be sure that we're connecting with every one of our students and really making that a priority? Like, okay, this week, check off my list. I have spoken to all 30 of my students for 5 minutes. Not about their grades, not about like, hey, you didn't turn in that assignment, but hey, how are you doing? That fairly neutral question, it should be a fairly neutral question. Who are you sharing your household with? You know, that's a pretty important question right now. And a child hopefully would have someone with whom they could share that. And it's a significant thing in these days. So keeping track in your mind, like keeping a notebook where you have significant questions you could ask children, so that they're not, but not judgmental, not like, nothing about your grades for that matter, just about how they are doing. It is the missing piece, as Kathy said earlier, and Amy Miller's in my conversation. You know, we cannot worry about how they're doing, how they're meeting the core standards, the academic achievement standards set by our state in normal times. I have some doubts about how effective and relevant those were in the first place. But that aside, what in the world are we doing right now? We must attend to the social and emotional well-being of children, and all the children, not just the ones who are, we know, in compromised or difficult situations, all of the children. Because I don't know right now a single person who couldn't use a little social and emotional support. I don't know a person. These are very uncertain, unusual times. So we have all these kids, you know, all this time that we have with these children. And how do we be sure that we're making and not just with the ones that it's easier to connect. I know that as a teacher of teachers, you know, there are some teachers whose room you love to go into. Oh, I can't wait to talk with that person. And then there are other ones where it's like, ugh, okay, you got to make yourself do it. And that's equity, to be sure that we're treating everyone with the same time, the same respect, the same dignity, the same curiosity. So anybody have any comments about how that was to meet somebody, perhaps someone that you've never met before, that you may never see again, to just share those couple of insights of those? They're kind of intimate. how you're doing and who you're sharing your house with. How was that? Anybody have a comment, or you can chat it if you'd like, or just unmute yourself.
I could have talked longer to Leslie, and I've never met her before, but we could have talked for hours.
Yeah. Ursula, what part of the conversation was the most fulfilling or rich?
That in her district, she has the same worries and concerns that I do in a totally different part of the state. We're in two completely different places in many senses, like, politically and socially and size wise and everything.
Interesting. Yeah. And would you mind summarizing just a word or two about what are those trends that you're seeing?
Well, we started talking about how worried we are to go back in person in January. So that's, I think, on a lot of people's minds.
Surely, rightfully.
Yeah. How you're going to
Yeah.
handle that.
Yeah. I'm grateful for our governor, who is, has been very conservative about the matter and very clear about the matter since the
Yeah, she
beginning.
might have to step in and make a declaration about schools, because we feel like our school will fold to the pressure the board is under. Our
And
district.
conservative, to be clear, she's scientifically conservative on the numbers, not political bent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you. Thank you, Ursula. Anyone else have anything else that, as Kathy Price mentioned in the session, the silences on Zoom are a little weird. You feel like, oh, interrupt. But does anyone have anything else they'd like to report out or comment about how having a few moments with someone even online was? So I invite you, I'm curious to hear how, as we move along, if you try this idea of the one-on-one with a student, as you would in a classroom, to having a moment, just assuring them that you're just checking in with them, not going to scold them or get into anything else. You're just going to check in with them, see how they're doing. So students are learning social and emotional skills all the time, whether they're the ones we intend them to be learning or not. Think about how many instances there are in a day where a student has the opportunity to observe, see modeled, witness, maybe even be told explicitly how you handle a conflict, how you handle frustration, disappointment, betrayal. Kids bring their whole souls, their whole little selves to school. And if we don't intend to address those whole persons, we need to tell them to stop doing it. Because they do learn it. Yeah, they learn it. I see Katrina's face exhibiting how I think many of us feel, because they do, of course, they bring their whole selves. And we need to develop the skills. And this has been the direction CASEL has really focused on, I'd say, for the last 6 years, is how do we prepare the adults in children's lives to be able to model, understand, be empathetic, be skillful around those whole selves that come to school. Think how many times a child has an emotion in school. I think it takes a lot of nerve to raise your hand, huh? A lot of nerve.
I think one of the things that the adult milieu has to emphasize is how emotionally costly it is to be that person for so many kids. And one of the reasons I like being in a pull-out gifted program is because I can keep my group small.
Yeah.
But I've also taught general ed, and when you've got 30 kids, you can't build the classroom that feels safe for all of them or even the majority of them. And it's also, you can't give that to that many kids.
Yeah.
Just humanly, you know.
That's a very good point, terribly important point, especially at this time when we know that the children have higher needs, and we ourselves, depending on our circumstances, could be having higher needs. As you said, Ursula spoke just even about the physical fear of returning to school and what that's going to be like. Yeah. Yesterday on a call, I was on a 4-hour virtual conference with Castles. They have an annual conference. Actually, this is just the second one. I flew back last year from Thailand all the way to Chicago expressly for this conference last year. It's a lot easier just sitting at home yesterday watching, a lot cheaper too. But one of the things they talked about was self-care and then squad care. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it, that while it's absolutely necessary that we take care of ourselves, we are simultaneously taking care of and being taken care of by our squad, our crew. And it's important to pay very deliberate attention as to who is your crew, on whom can you depend, with whom can you speak honestly and optimistically, hopefully. Yeah, thinking of all those sides, you know, physically, are you sleeping enough? Are you eating well? Are you getting exercise on a regular basis? Do you have an extensive group of people that you can count on and trust? Are you a trustworthy person to a certain number of people? Do you have some techniques in order to calm your nervous system? I know I loved that the woman that led the break, I think it was the break in the morning, talking about a nervous, giving yourself a break with your nervous system, a nervous system break. Because, you know, we've had it quite advertised, I can think quite marketed to ourselves, that we're having breaks. We're taking self-care as, you know, going to have a coffee with a friend or getting your nails done or whatever. There's been an awful lot of marketing of that. But how do we calm our nervous systems? And do we learn how to do that? And do we provide children that opportunity to say, oh, let's just take a moment. Let's do that right now. Let's just take a moment. So sit back, put your feet, both feet on the ground. If you'd like, if you're comfortable, close your eyes or cast your eyes down. We're going to do this just for 1 minute. We're going to breathe really deeply. So drawing in your breath. And then letting out your breath slowly and very fully. Drawing in your breath again. And letting out your breath again very deeply. Noticing how your feet feel on the ground. Noticing how your hands are lying on your legs or your chair, desk. Noticing how the space behind your eyes feel. Recognizing that we're right here, right now. October 16th. For the moment, safe and sound. And as you're ready, coming back into the space together. Remembering that we can sprinkle into our lessons, our days, our day-to-day, a moment of mindful awareness, being intentionally mindful and present. And what a great technique for young people to learn. Then when they can feel themselves getting hooked, agitated, anxious, that they can stop just a moment. I really love the mindfulness world grew really big, as we all know, a couple of years ago, really heavily marketed again. And I think was understood as something separate from the social and emotional well-being. And I'm grateful to hear that it's all part of how we understand and develop skills around our inner selves. You know, we pay a lot of attention to the outer world, and how do we pay equal attention to the inner world? So in your discussion about SEL, what did you come up with? Anybody want to chat or put it in the chat or speak out about what questions you have, what concerns, what experiences you might have had with SEL?
I mean, just related to your comment I was just appalled that there would be people who would tell children or not allow children to bring their entire little souls and their entire selves. And I know there are, but just hearing it said out loud is, oh.
Yeah. I don't know if it's as much that people explicitly say it as much as that we have systems and institutions that, and time restraints and testing, etc., that, you know, what we assess that the child learns, whether it's said explicitly or not, that their whole self is not welcome, that their entire self. Would you agree with that, Katrina? Yeah. That we, you know, do we allow our whole selves to bring forth? And that comes again to the equity piece that I'm just going to sprinkle in there, because that's become the big focus of CASEL this year, obviously, and very appropriate and relevant to what's happening in our country right now, in terms of how do we invite the identities and the identities of all the children in our classroom and our own identities, and really articulate that and speak to that and help children identify identity. What is their cultural identity, their familial identity? How do we celebrate? How do we recognize and celebrate those, speak comfortably about them? How do we make that a systematic part of our institutions and our classrooms so that all children feel like they belong in school? I think with gifted kids, you have a particular, you know, students that are recognized as gifted, and in programs for the gifted, you have a particular population. And probably ones that for various reasons might not feel they always fit, but probably recognize that they are recognized and suited, well suited to learning. I don't know, would you agree with that statement? Is that true generally? I think gifted kids feel like school was made for them.
Sometimes yes and sometimes no. I have gifted kids who are like, school is dumb. Why am I here? I should be in another grade. Everything's boring.
Yeah. So they don't feel that it's serving their needs. No. Yeah, I know a few. I see this. I'm looking quickly at the chats. So I wonder if everybody feels like an outsider in school. It's a sad thought, but I do sometimes wonder, does everybody feel, you know, it's a part of belonging. And that's another big focus right now on social emotional learning, is how do we make environments that everyone feels like they belong? Especially if their teacher doesn't look like them and the children talked about in the book are not looking like them. How do we help everybody feel like they belong? That everyone's every experience and perspective and lived reality is welcomed and equally valued. So I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit. We're first going to do a a true or false quiz on what is SEL. Hopefully I can get this screen, I can get my screen to share properly. Aha, I think we did it. Oops. Okay. We have spent some time, our time together. We'll be doing basically a welcoming ritual, which is what we did when we went into the breakout rooms and talked to one another. So that's a way to welcome us all into the space. We'll do some experiential learning, and then we'll do an optimistic closing. Again, CASEL has been promoting these 3 components of every lesson as a way to make every lesson, whether you're teaching mathematics or science, a way of making it a socially and emotionally focused lesson. So you're developing social and emotional skills by having these 3 components. So there's our check-in. So here's our true or false. Yeah. So is SEL a technique for classroom management? Just glance at these and say, would you say this is true or false? Each of those statements. So I realize this isn't really a good true or false question unless you got to check several things. I'm going to go through. I would say number 1 is false. It is not a technique for classroom management. It has mistakenly been utilized that way as primarily a technique. I think that's horrible manipulation, quite frankly. Just yeah, I mean, I know we all need to manage our classrooms, but to use social and emotional learning as a classroom management technique is a gross injustice to the field. I think it's a curriculum and skill set. It certainly is a curriculum and skill set for students and adults. It can be a weekly lesson, although that's a very limited scope on it. It needs to be integrated throughout all the topics in the classroom, and it needs to be integrated in all classes, and it needs to be woven throughout all learning. It is not specifically for vulnerable children coming from challenging backgrounds. It has again become misused. It's been misused to be seen that way as something that, you know, it's just, we have our SEL. I've heard that used, that our SEL students, we're all SEL students. Every single person I know needs to develop and continue to work on. It's a lifelong task of learning your social and becoming a more competent social friend, social person, and also learn about our own emotions. It's not remediation. So really this isn't a good quiz because I didn't give you the opportunity to answer it properly. But so it's the important thing about SEL is it describes processes by which both the adults and the children learn the skills of self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, mutually respectful relationships, and compassionate and accountable decision-making. So when you think about, like, take a certain student, catch a student in your mind, think of a particular student you've worked with, and allow yourself to think of them through each of those lenses. Are they strong in self-awareness? Are they able to recognize their own feelings, their challenges, their gifts, how they're impacting a group? Do they have some skills to regulate their behavior, their mood, their thoughts, their choices? For example, if today you're when you checked in as an animal, it was an animal that was working pretty well for you. Do you have some skills to maintain that mood? If you were in an emotional state that was not particularly productive for the tasks at hand, do you have some skills to change your mood? Social awareness. How aware is that student that you're thinking of? How aware are they of other people's realities, perspectives, dignity, background, sensitivities, joy, what makes them pleased? How capable are they of creating mutually respectful relationships? And how skillful are they in making compassionate and accountable decisions? So they are skills, which is really exciting that these are social emotional learning develops skills, and it, just like other skills, a skill set that becomes more permanent with practice, more agile. That's one of our jobs, I believe, is to provide a lot of practice, teaching and then practicing, so that our skills become stronger. They're what in Howard Gardner's model they would call the inter and intra-personal skills. And I'd ask you to think, what do you do on a daily or weekly basis in order to teach and model those skills? So it needs to be integrated, modeled by adults, taught in all subject areas, explicitly, systematically taught in direct instruction, and it becomes the flavor of interactions reflected in policies, practices, and procedures. It's an approach, a way of being, and a curriculum. And as Will Rogers famously said, you can't teach what you don't know any more than you can come back from where you ain't been. So I'm stopping the screen share now for a minute so I can see everybody. So we're going to go back into the breakout rooms for 5 minutes. You can finish, if we can put them back in the same ones, Lori, I know that's a bit more complicated. If it's too complicated, it doesn't matter. Have a chance to meet other people. But I would like you to consider, so how are, just from that rough, what we just talked about roughly, how does that contribute to equity and social justice if we were systematically developing those skills in children in all of our classrooms, in our adults, in the adults? How would that contribute to equity and social justice? See you in 5.
Amazing within some of my classes where the kids just automatically stand up and help each other, you know, and especially right now, you know, and it's not a matter of, well, you have an
I joined a little bit late because I was having technical issues, and so I wasn't in the first breakout rooms.
When it comes to social justice, you need to have compassion. You need to be able to like empathize with other people in order to understand their struggle and help them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the first thing that popped into my head is how
You did it, Lori. Thank you.
Oh, good.
At least in our case, you did. Good. We had a very rich conversation right away. Lori, thank you for being able to figure out how to get us back in our same groups. Did everyone have a chance to speak to somebody? Have somebody in a room with them? Yeah, good, good. Anything coming up? Anything about equity and social justice and why that is facilitated? Those conversations might or might not be facilitated by social and emotional development, intentional learning.
Well, so Kathy and I had a conversation that was slightly off topic, but it kind of came around to this, that the pandemic seems to be making people more concerned with holding fast to what they've had rather than reach out to new stuff. And that makes sense. You know, you tend to get more tribalistic, conservative in your taste, perhaps, when you feel threatened. And I think kids feel threatened. So if kids already started off more threatened, more traumatized, more less able to self-regulate, it's only got, it can only spiral from there.
Yeah, yeah. I know some of you attended a session about neuroscience, the brain, what happens in the brain. And that is so true. What Jeffrey says is so true. When we are stressed, our focus shrinks, our ability to take another person's perspective withdraws, becomes much smaller. It's a very difficult thing to counter, because biologically that's what we do. You know, when you need to escape something, that's all, your entire focus goes on that. But how do we counter that? With policies. Amy Miller and I had a good conversation about racism. You know, cultural, the beauty, one of the great strengths of this state, and also one of the great challenges of this state, is the very different ethnic minorities, ethnic groupings that we have. And can we use these skills of social and emotional learning to develop the trust and the relationship so that we can respectfully have conversations about that? We must have those conversations. So I had one of the experiences I had that I'm most grateful for was 2012. I had a contract with the Taos public schools here, and particularly with the high school. And I worked with the teachers and with some of the students, but primarily with the faculty during their professional learning collaborations, you know, their PLCs. And at about halfway through the year, one of the teachers, who had always kind of held me at a distance, I would say, asked me if I would come in and speak to her anatomy and physiology class about race and culture and ethnicity. And I was like, I guess we could do that. So Carla Chavez, I don't think she would mind me naming her, science teacher, and I worked together and came up with some exercises and worked with her students that she said had been to school. Many of them had been in school for 13 years. They were about to graduate high school, but they had always stayed in their same little ethnic groups, their same little cliques. So she asked if I could help deal with that. I tell you, those students were so grateful to have a constructive, structured conversation about that. And it ended up, I just went in at 7:45 on my own dime for every Thursday morning for about 2 months. And at the end of it, the kids were so grateful to have had this conversation. They said, we should have done this earlier. And from that, I thought they meant earlier in the year. And they said, no, when you first enter high school, you should do this. So it turned out into this thing that still goes on today from 2012 till now. I think actually we had 1 year, 2 of them. And so all of the freshmen and a group of seniors that have been trained spend 3 days together talking about emotional intelligence skills and social emotional skills. And we talked a lot, especially in those early years, we talked a lot about ethnicity and what is ethnicity and there's only one race, in fact, human race. That's the only race there actually is biologically. We have different cultures, different ethnic groups, different religions, different histories, different backgrounds, nationalities, etc. But we really only have one race. And what does that mean? And what parts of our ethnicity do we choose to identify with? But that tradition, that EQ retreat of 3 days in the fall, has continued to this time, and has reduced the bullying in the schools Although I heard something said on the conference yesterday, they said the children say, yeah, the bullying program has worked well here. We have less bullying in school, but when we look out the window, we see the adults bullying. The adults are the bullies. You know, maybe we shouldn't fix the children. We should fix ourselves and the institutions. Yeah.
Or else teach them some tools so that they grow up to be better adults.
Yeah. And we have to be modeling that, you know, what fool child is they're gonna do what we do rather than what we say, aren't they?
That's what Leslie and I talked about, is getting your whole staff to invest and general ed teachers to be believers. And it's sort of like gifted. There's a whole school of thought that it doesn't exist, or it's not important, or that everybody should, you know, over my career, the box that kids have to fit in has gotten smaller and smaller. And so the majority of kids look like outliers, like they are never going to fit in the box anymore.
Yeah. We need to take back the education, you know.
Yeah.
There's such potential and promise in education. And we need to be leaders in what education becomes. It's an opportunity in this very difficult time in our country with the crisis, economic and political, etc., and the pandemic, of course, gives us an opportunity to rethink what is relevant and what's important in education. So thank you for discussing it. A couple of pieces that I really stood out to me in this conference yesterday. They talked about we need to build a window and a mirror. So we need to provide windows for our students so that they can look out at the world and see possibilities and other ways of doing and different perspectives. And we need to provide them a mirror so that they can learn about who they are. What are their strengths? What are their challenges? What are their gifts? What are they going to bring to the world? Where are they going to add to the world? Connect first, instruct second, over and over, and particularly in this time. Connect with families, call the families once a month, not to report about the child, ask how the heck are you doing? And we need to have school leaders who are doing that to their staff. We need to have principals who call every teacher, and not to just say, you know, what attendance rate are you getting? But rather, how are you doing? How is your family doing? What do you need? What can I help you with? Here we've had two examples. We have one school that they have been connecting with the families very intensely since last March. And then another school and school group that also have been calling. And I said, what's the intention? Well, the main intention of the calls with the second group is attendance. Or at least that's what the teachers that I've talked with have felt that was the intention. So it gets to that question of what is your intention? Same action, calling the families. Well, what's the intention? Because often if you talk about attendance and truancy and CYFD, you're probably not going to build a lot of trust. But if your intention is to build trust so that then when there is a problem, you have a relationship on which to build. We become more resilient that way, as we all know. So let's think, we're about at the end of our time. I want to be sure that we allow enough time for everybody to have an optimistic closing. So again, not a punitive, not a regrets like, oh, we didn't get to this, but rather an optimistic closing. And in the last session, we did the old familiar one with things we're grateful for. I wanted to explain, I think we'll do it again. The reason, the 2 bits of research, one is that when you think about things you're grateful for, it actually changes the neuropeptides in coursing through your body. It changes, and the more sensitive we can become to that, like noticing, listening to everybody talk about what they feel good about. I notice my shoulders drop, my heart rate slows. The reason we do the breathing is because that's one of the autonomic nervous system functions, autonomic functions that we can control quite easily. It's a lot harder to control your blood pressure or your heartbeat. We can learn to, but it's quite easy to regulate our breath. And when we take a deep breath, our body says, oh, everything's okay. Because if you're being chased by a lion, you're not breathing deeply and slowly. You're breathing high and fast. But when we take a deep breath, it's like, okay, things are okay. And we can control that quite easily. So the, yeah, being able to check it. So that grateful is a remarkable tool, I think, to calm the nervous system, to realize right now, I'm really grateful I have the right to vote. I'm grateful that I have potable water. I'm grateful that I get to be on Zoom. My gosh, I get to meet all these people and have conversations, meaningful conversations. So, and secondly, there's this really interesting bit of research that says that people that can be specific about their emotions, both if it's a emotion you have when your needs are being met, or when your emotions are not being met, your needs are not being met. Being specific is correlated with better mental health. Because if I say, tell me a time when, what was your relationship like with your mom? Tell me a good time you had with your mom. I always had a good time with my mom. We always had a good time. Versus being able to say, oh, I remember this one afternoon when we were with the children, we were walking along and we were by the river, and she kept asking such hopeful questions and directed me towards looking at the strengths of my children rather than worrying about something that was challenging for me. And now that I think about it, that was a consistent quality of my mother, was to highlight the positive. So being able to be specific about that is correlated with better mental health, because then when something is challenging, rather than simply saying, oh, everything's terrible, you know, I'm hopeless, I can't manage, you can say, you know, right now, this is really challenging being by myself, living by myself. It's very, very challenging. And I miss friends and I'm desperate to talk to other people. And I haven't really developed yet the skills of connecting naturally with some of my friends on Zoom. And all of that's challenging. And I can remember a time when it wasn't challenging. Or yes, this part of my life is going well. And now that I mention it, I could get on Zoom. And I think I have some other friends that would appreciate being reached out to. So being able to be detailed, nuanced, and specific about both when things are going well and when things are not going well, it's correlated with better mental health. So why not give kids that chance? So if you would write down, we're almost out of time, I know, just write down, it'll carry you through your rest of your day, 5 things that you're grateful for. Chat a couple of them if you'd like. Yeah. Yeah. How great. Lovely to read those, huh? Lovely to read the messages. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for those specific and yeah, intimate sharings of things that you're grateful for. Really lovely. I'd like to take a moment to thank Lori for pulling this all together. An attendance almost equal to on person. And thank you for being the logistical support in every way, Lori. And I don't know if we've met before we started on this project, but I certainly have really felt supported by you throughout the process of preparing and organizing.